On this episode of AvTalk, Boeing launches the 777X freighter with Qatar Airways as the launch customer. And some Ethiopian Airlines staff have fled the country in incredible ways, stowing away on flights to Europe and the US. Hello and welcome to episode 149 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How's it going?
Hello, Jason. Jason, things are going well. It's very snowy here today, and it's still coming down. It's been a day of shoveling and then working at the computer and then getting up from the computer and putting on my sweater vest and standing outside the window or standing next to the window and going, really coming down out there. And then getting back to work.
Chicago. I'm sure you'll be okay.
We'll be just fine. Yes, there's been some shoveling. The snowblower was broken out at some point. I think the funniest thing was that Lou, who is an air traffic controller at Chicago Center, posted one of the flight strips that they got, and one of the I don't know if it was NOTAMed or just a memo, but one of the plows at Midway in Chicago broke down the center runway, so they had to tow the snowplow off the runway before they could use it.
Did they use a tug?
I have no idea. I mean, one assumes, or they have like one of those big wreckers come in and grab it. But I thought that was kind of amusing.
It's an unfortunate place.
I mean, right in the middle of the main runway. So not great timing, but everything seems to be back up and running. Yeah. So O'Hare has nearly 700 cancellations today. So over 50% of flights.
We had our own little blizzard in the Northeast over last week? Over the weekend.
Over the weekend, yeah.
Yeah, New York got about 12 inches, a foot of snow. Boston got absolutely dumped on. But it was okay here. It's mostly melted already. The airports here seem to do mostly okay, actually. The Port Authority did a great job of clearing our airports. Didn't hear much until the following day on Sunday when JetBlue had an utter meltdown, but that's nothing new.
Yeah, that you said it's nothing new, and they knew it was coming. The snow was actually forecasted to be worse than it was in New York, and then it still happened, and this is not the first time that these things have happened to them.
No, we weren't planning on talking about this, but I guess we'll talk about it.
Might as well.
Yeah. JetBlue has always historically been absolutely miserable in recovering from any sort of significant weather event, be it hurricanes or tropical storms, or in this case, blizzards. Not even a blizzard. This was just a snowstorm. But they did the right thing leading up to it. They mass canceled most of, if not all of their flights in the Northeast, Boston and the New York area, on Saturday, and they plan to resume normally on Sunday like every other airline did. And they couldn't do it. Sunday night, there were flights landing at JFK that couldn't get to a gate for up to nearly 4 hours in some cases, up to the length of the actual flight. And from everything I hear, it was really down to a lack of communication within the airline of how many flights they could accept and a staffing issue. They just couldn't get people in the right place to actually work the flights once they landed, and that just created like a cascading effect of just nothing good.
Youch. Well, things seem to be back on track now, and hopefully the weather headed east keeps people on their toes, I guess.
Yeah, sure. They did one thing that was quite surprising. What cued me into this whole thing in the first place was they actually had a flight cleared to land on 31 right at JFK, who then got word from the company that, sorry, our terminal's a mess. We have no room for you. Go to Newark. And they actually canceled their own landing clearance at JFK and then diverted while they were already just at a couple thousand feet on approach, probably about 2 minutes from landing. That's not something I've seen happen before.
No. I mean, good views of the city, though, for the passengers.
Yeah, great.
Looking on the bright side of things,
you end up at the wrong airport, but you're not stuck on the plane for 4 hours waiting for a gate.
It's you have to take a different train, I guess, than
only like 3 or 4.
So what we were actually going to start the show with was the launch of the 777X freighter. So Boeing is calling it the 777-8F, as it will be a pure cargo freighter based on the 777-8, which is the smaller version of the 777X. That launch order goes to Qatar Airways. They placed an order for 34 of the 777X freighters, plus options for 16. And they also came to a memorandum of understanding with Boeing for up to 50 737-10s, so the largest variant of the 737 MAX. Jason, I wonder why they would need up to 50 737-10s.
It's anyone's guess, really. Yeah, nobody knows.
Nobody knows. So do we want to talk about the MAX order first, just to get it out of the way, and then do the freighter?
Let's talk about the MAX order. And I'm going to read one of my tweets where I did some research to go through the timeline of this, what led up to this order, because there's a lot of back and forth. In 2011, Qatar originally ordered 50 A320neo family aircraft. That was a long time ago. Nothing really came of that order, though. In 2016, Qatar orders up to 60 737 MAX 8 aircraft. In 2018, 2 years later, Boeing delivered the first 737 MAX to Qatar to much fanfare in Payne Field, but it was placed with Air Italy, which doesn't exist anymore. In 2020, Air Italy ceased operations. In 2020, later that year, Qatar canceled that 737 MAX order outright and shipped all of its already delivered aircraft back to, somebody. Just a couple weeks ago, in 2022, Airbus canceled Qatar's A321neo order, and just a few weeks later, here we are once again with Qatar ordering up to 50 737 MAX. So this is a saga that literally spans more than a decade already.
And what's interesting to me is the lead time on these orders. I feel like they were ordering airplanes and they didn't know what to do with them. And then they came up with the Air Italy idea, and they're like, oh, okay, we'll just do that. And then that didn't work, and they were like, forget it.
Forget it. We need to take them back. But the original 2011 order for the 5320neo family aircraft, that was very early on for the Neo line of aircraft. And I think it just sat around. They never had any firm commitments for that possibly. But in 2017, I think it was that order was actually firmed up. And here we are in 2022 with the aircraft that were ready to come. But Airbus said, no. But yeah, this is a lot of back and forth of aircraft that never came to be, and cancellations and returns, and quite the saga.
And there's a decent possibility that these 737-10s will never come to be. This is only a memorandum of understanding, which I always forget whether or not that's better than a letter of intent, as far as like more firm, or is that less firm than because there's orders where you actually give people money and say, I want these planes. And there's letters of intent, which say, I want to give you money and get these planes. And then there's memorandums of understanding that say, I want to talk more about giving you money, and I maybe want these planes. At least that's my understanding, but I may have those flipped.
I don't know the answer to that.
Either way, we should come up with like a fourth class in trademark it or something and have that be ours. In any case, up to 50 of those. Then where the real money changes hands, and you don't get a White House signing ceremony for nothing. 34 firm orders plus 16 options for the 777X freighter. And the 20 of those 34 come out of Qatar's order for 60 of the 777-9 passenger aircraft. So they're down to 40 of those. 20 of those get converted to the freighter. And then the remaining 14 are a fresh order plus the 16 options. And that's it. It's an interesting aircraft because here's where it gets interesting. The payload is roughly equal to the 747 freighter, and you get a 25% improvement on costs. So, that's a decent chunk of change right there.
Yeah, sounds great, but let's look a little more into the details. What else do we know?
So we've got a range of 4,410 nautical miles, and roughly the same as 747-400 freighter, 112-ton payload. So that's an interesting thing. The other thing is that they're taking 2 777 freighters now. Everyone wants freighters now, so they're ordering 2 current model 777 full freighters to capitalize on the, what do they call, quote unquote, buoyant air cargo market.
Buoyant. That's a fun word.
Very buoyant. So a very interesting airplane that will...
it's a big boy. The wingspan on the ground is obviously and intentionally extremely similar to the current. The current freighter is 212 feet 7 inches wide, or 64.8 meters. The new 777-8F is 1 inch wider, with a 1 inch wider wingspan of 212 feet 8 inches, or 64.8 meters. But when the wingtips extend, it goes up to 235 feet 5 inches, or 71.8 meters. So it's quite a bit wider. Oh, not the fuselage, but the wingspan is quite a bit bigger with these extendable wingtips, which is pretty cool.
I love the extendable wingtips. I still think it's so cool. But every time I think about these, I'm like, well, what happens when one of them goes tech? What's going to happen? Do they like lock them down and then they can't pull into the gate? Do they take them to hard? It's going to happen eventually. And I guess my question is, what happens then? So that'll be interesting.
Yeah,
that'll be
the aircraft's also a bit longer. The current freighter is 209 feet 1 inches long. The length of the 777X freighter is 232 feet 6 inches. So it's quite a bit longer too. Interesting aircraft, but it also has a diminished range compared to the current generation freighter, which is an interesting decision.
Yeah, I think the volume or the payload versus range trade-offs here are an interesting one, and to see whether or not, but by the same token, it has an increased range over the 747-400, which it's kind of replacing.
That is true. Unfortunately, it will not be a true replacement for the 747-400 freighter, which had the nose door. What do you call that?
Yeah, the folding nose door. So that's the big question. I mean, how long? Because you're going to need aircraft with a way to load those extremely large, long pieces. So the 747 freighter is not going away anytime soon. Soon.
No.
And we've talked about this before on the podcast, and the necessity of that door. I mean, to move long, bulky, awkward cargo is so key. And how they get around that when eventually the 747 freighter fleet, including the Dash 8s, goes away. I mean, that'll be interesting, but we could be talking about,
decades.
Well, we're definitely talking about decades, but we could be talking 2-3 generations of aircraft design later. So I think that's going to be an interesting problem to solve and see what the freighter of the future or freighter of the future looks like. So that'll be something to think about.
Yeah. The family lineup on the Boeing website of their freighters is really quite interesting when you look at it left to right. It goes all the way from the little 737 freighter and the BCF, the converted freighters, the 76, again converted, and then you get the dedicated freighters, and it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to the 747. It's quite the family Boeing has in the freighter division.
Yeah, I mean, the growth that we've talked about over the past couple of years, especially with the rise of consumer, the Amazonification of freight, where you're looking at short delivery times and things like that, where the 737-800 especially has become a great platform, and the A321 has started to really take off as far as converted freighters go. I mean, I think that's really interesting to see how much of that continues versus how these large freighters fare, is in terms of usage and where they're used. But it'll be really interesting to see who else picks up the 777X freighter. So Qatar being a launch customer, that'll be interesting. They like to be a launch customer, but sometimes they don't. They've said we want to take things first before, and then we'll see that if that ends up happening. But it'll be interesting to see who else decides that the 777X freighter is for them versus the A350 freighter.
Yep. And Qatar is going to like being first up because, historically speaking, whichever airline launches the aircraft type or orders it very early on, they get a say in the specifications of that aircraft. And it doesn't get tailor made to them, but they definitely have an outsized influence on what the final product is. So maybe this is exactly the specs Qatar wanted.
Maybe.
Akbar gets what Akbar wants. So, except if it's an Airbus A320neo family aircraft.
Yeah. So we'll check back in on that one later. We've got Ethiopian Airlines resuming 737 MAX service this week. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of February. We thought it was going to be today. It was in the schedule for today. They said it was going to be today. Then it wasn't today. So by the time the podcast comes out, hopefully it was yesterday, which would be Thursday. We'll see if they put the aircraft back into service. Who knows?
You got that?
Yeah, it was such a weird thing. Like they made this, they had so what's interesting to me is that initially Ethiopian said, we're going to be last.
They are not last. They're not even close to last to put it back in.
Yeah, they said we're going to be last. Absolutely, we're going to be last. We're going to be the last airline to put the 737 MAX back into service. After every other airline does it, that's going to be us. That's not the case, as Jason says, not even close to being the case. But yesterday, on Tuesday, the 1st of February, they conducted a publicity flight with, I believe there was representatives from the airline, from Boeing, I think.
Yeah, Boeing, the government dignitaries, they had their own executives on board.
Yeah, and everything. And then they were supposed to put the aircraft into commercial service today and did not. So who knows what the deal is there, but hopefully they get that going. That's nothing. That's not the Ethiopian Airlines story that we really wanted to talk about this week. CNN had an article this week on Ethiopian Airlines staff members that were either born or have ethnic Tigrayan descent working for the airline have faced kind of persecution, and their families have been targeted within the conflict that is currently happening in Tigray in Ethiopia. Multiple staff members from Ethiopian Airlines have fled the country inside Ethiopian Airlines planes. In one instance, a pair hid in the bulk cargo area of the A350 that was carrying flowers to Brussels. And in a second incident, which is absolutely bonkers, 2 maintenance technicians concealed themselves above the crew rest compartment in a 777.
Huh. This is one of the 777s that was converted to a COVID combi, I think, was it?
I think so, but I'm not exactly sure. But either way, it's still a passenger 777. That from the cabin crew rest compartment, which is in the middle of the aircraft and sits above the passenger cabin. So you take a small set of stairs up, and it's basically a cotted area that has, I think the 777 has room for 6 or 8 crew members in the cabin crew rest area. And they're basically like bunks with little tiny storage compartments, and you can pull little curtains and sleep up there. They widened a maintenance access panel. So there's a maintenance access panel in the crew rest area that gets you into the area between the aircraft's outer wall and this crew rest area. And they widened that so that they could crawl through there into the area outside the cabin crew rest area, but still up in the ceiling. And hid in there for 36 hours because the flight went from Addis to Lagos, Nigeria, then to Dublin, and then to Washington, D.C.
That's quite the ride. 36 hours up there. I mean, at least it was, probably all things considered a comfortable ride. And by comfortable, I mean pressurized and not freezing. So that's good. But wow, that's intense.
I mean, the most bonkers thing to me about all of this is that the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol cited Ethiopian Airlines for lax security protocols.
I mean, that doesn't seem fair.
Like, not that it doesn't, I don't know if fair is the right word. It was just like, it was like a working through the motions of you have staff that are stowing away an aircraft to escape, persecution. Oh, and by the way, we're going to fine you. It's just that a weird kind of aside to the story. But yeah, just the desperation to hatch this plan and then hide inside basically the skin of between the skin of the aircraft and all of the air duct work, and just be there for a day and a half.
They felt they need to do it. They felt they were being persecuted and in fear of their life. And here they are now in the U.S. I don't know what their fate will be. The article says they were detained by U.S. Homeland Security before being transferred to CBP, Customs and Border Protection. I guess if they're seeking asylum, they're here, and hopefully it'll be granted. Unclear what happens at this point, but
yeah,
thankfully they made it here in one piece, safe and sound. But wow, that's a story.
Yeah, and the pair that hid in the A350 cargo area, they have been granted asylum in Belgium, so they've already received permission to stay in Belgium. So just a terrible situation. To see the desperation of people finding ways to escape that situation. Some really harrowing stuff. And we'll put a link to the full article in the show notes, because it's worth reading in full. Jason, let's take a quick break and regroup ourselves, and then we'll come talk about, hopefully for the last time, we will discuss the U.S. 5G C-band deployment, because I know I'm tired of it. I know you're tired of it. And dear listener, we know you're tired of it. So hopefully it'll be the last time we talk about it. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It is now time for our weekly discussion of things that we should have never had to have talked about in the first place. Welcome back to our topic, 5G C-band deployment in the U.S., a subtitled, "Nobody did their homework and everyone's upset." And hopefully this is the last time. What?
Hold on, let me check my phone. Nope. I still don't have the signal. It's still not here. I demand a refund for the last 2 weeks.
That's the thing. Like, my phone? No, I haven't gotten it.
I don't know.
So last week we talked about the additional AMOCs and all of that good fun stuff. None of that has really changed, except to say that they've been extended. Regional airlines are still entirely unhappy because they feel they've been left out in the cold, which, I mean, really they have. But 90% of the U.S. fleet is covered. Late last week, the FAA and the telecom companies, Verizon and AT&T, came to an agreement. And the statement from the FAA, I won't read the whole thing, but it basically reads as if all of the things that they agreed to on the 28th of January, 2022 could have been worked out at any point in the 2 years prior to the launch of the C-band.
Yeah, that didn't happen.
At any point. None of these seem like they're insurmountable. None of these agreements, let's see, provided more precise data about exact location of wireless transmitters, more thorough analysis of how 5G C-band signals interact with sensitive aircraft instruments. Those things seem like they could have been done at any point.
Could have and should have, and probably should have even started when they first announced that they were going to delay the rollout from, December 19th, where that they didn't do anything until the new date in January. Lots of things went wrong, and there is actually I think it's a congressional hearing on this tomorrow.
Yes, indeed.
The Subcommittee on Aviation hearing on, quote, finding the right frequency, 5G development and aviation safety. Just off on the Twitters from David Shepardson, We have the prepared statements from the Honorable Peter DeFazio, who is the Democratic chair of the
Aviation
Subcommittee. And I quote here, "If the events of the last 2 months have taught us anything, it's that the current interagency process for auctioning off spectrum is completely broken. My colleagues and I watched in complete dismay as the deployment of 5G originally proceeded without any of the safety mitigations the the FAA, aviation industry, and I have long called for. This resulted in disorienting display of 5G fits and starts over the last several months, inevitably due to the FCC auctioning off 5G spectrum without any concrete plan in place to safely deploy these technologies without interfering with aviation." He continues to say, "But it did not have to be this way." Yes, the Honorable Peter A. DeFazio, I agree. The FAA should have done its freaking homework months or years ago. The process, I don't see how the FCC is to blame for auctioning off this spectrum. It's, in my eyes, completely on the FAA and the aviation industry for not doing a damn thing until its homework was due. And then they asked for an extension, and then they asked for another extension, and then they asked for buffer zones, and then nobody's happy. He is right to say that the interagency process is completely broken, but they didn't even invite the FCC to this congressional hearing, which is right there on its face. Isn't that fundamentally broken?
I'm still laughing about the title of Finding the Right Frequency.
They made a joke.
I think we can both agree, or perhaps all agree, dear listeners, that congressional hearings are rarely about actually finding an answer to a problem, and more about whoever's testifying getting a chance to grandstand, or whoever's being testified to getting a chance to grandstand.
Somebody on that hearing is going to complain about their flight being delayed last October or something and ask, was that because of 5G? I guarantee it.
I mean, that's not a bet I'm going to take, because you're right. I mean, you're 100% right. So no, I'm not. That is not a bet I'm going to take. But is the FCC blameless? No, probably not.
No.
Is the FAA an organization that seems to not have wanted to do anything and then got very upset when they were asked to do something? I think that's the case here. And feel free to email us at podcast@fr24.com if you have a different take, because I'm seriously trying to understand why this took as long as it did, and then why the answer was so simple. I mean, I guess that's what bothers me. Like, if we had gotten to the point where the FAA was coming out and saying, okay, we're trying all these tests, the test, things, it's inconclusive, it's not working, parts of it work, parts of it don't. It depends on the weather, it depends on the terrain, and we've got all of these mitigations in process. If that was the issue, if it only affected certain altimeters on certain times and certain days of the week, then that would make sense to me how this was so difficult to do. But all of this sounds like they told us where the towers were. They told us the amount of power that's going into the towers. And we said, okay, that's fine now.
Yep. Also, on top of that, they haven't even really cleared any general aviation or helicopter radio altimeters as far as we can tell. So there's a huge chunk of the aviation system that just is kind of in limbo right now.
Well, yes, but are there that many Cessnas doing ILS approaches? Or, Cessna 152s?
Maybe. Probably not.
No. Let this be the last time we talk about 5G, unless something dramatic happens, like, I don't know, the FAA says, oh, we talked to the FCC, everything's fine now. But we'll see what happens there. We'll put a link to the show notes to the testimony that will have already happened by the time the podcast comes out, so that you can follow along with that if you're a glutton for punishment. In other order news, American Airlines has decided that they need 30 additional 737 MAX 8s. They have also decided that they don't need the 787s that they have on order for a while now. They've deferred deliveries of 787s, assuming Boeing can restart deliveries of the 787s. They've deferred those deliveries back to the fourth quarter of 2023 and through 2027. So they pushed them back and slowed them down.
Now, was that a later batch of deliveries? Because they were quite vocal recently that they had to trim back their 2022 summer schedule because Boeing couldn't deliver. So are all those aircraft just pushed back, or is that a later set?
You know what? That's a really good question. I do not know exactly where in the delivery slots all of those aircraft were coming from. But the initial pass that I read on the order book pushed everything back.
Very
but
odd.
I'll have to go back to the 8K. But really what it shakes out as, we need more domestic capacity and we don't need as much international capacity, which tracks with, well,
that checks out.
So an interesting order, coming a good time for Boeing as they continue to kind of add on to their MAX order book. So good for them. I really hope they figure out this 787 business soon.
Yeah, or figure it out and then start fixing the aircraft that it has sitting around, which seems like it's going to take a while.
Yeah, that too. So an interesting thing also, I believe, first reported by Dave Shepardson over at Reuters. It is indeed. The FAA released guidance today, or released proposed guidance today for training revisions to prevent pilots from overly relying on autopilot and ensuring that they are focused on proper flight path management. So, to quote the FAA, pilots should always be aware of the aircraft's flight path so they can intervene if necessary. And these revised guidelines, or proposed guideline revisions, come out of two things. One, the 2013 Asiana flight 214 that the auto thrust rolled back. The pilots didn't catch it. The aircraft lost speed, and the aircraft struck the seawall on approach to San Francisco. That was the Asiana 777 in 2013. So that was the first incident, and the National Transportation Safety Board recommended a set of things that the FAA should adopt. And then the other part of that comes out of Congress's mandated response to the 737 MAX crashes. So that coming together, the FAA took both of those things and finally issued guidance. The fact that what's interesting to me is that the NTSB issued these recommendations not long after, as part of their crash report. So about a year after the crash in San Francisco, no action whatsoever on the FAA's part. Congress in 2019 says, okay, now it's time to get together. The FAA, starts doing things, which it's just, I know when we talked with Sean Payne, the NTSB investigator, about this, where, he's like, well, we can't mandate anything. We can only recommend things. And then governments, regulators need to act on those. And that's just got to be so frustrating to be an NTSB investigator saying we can fix the problem if somebody would tell, somebody to fix the problem.
Yeah, better late than never, I guess. But this always seems like a constant battle between the NTSB and not just the FAA, but any
modal regulator.
Even when it comes down to like gas pipelines, the NTSB has jurisdiction over. So it's not an FAA specific thing, but man, that's a long time since the Asiana, the San Francisco crash.
Yeah, when I was first reading this article, I was like, oh wow, I can't believe it was that long ago. So yeah, almost 10 years now. Jason, you brought this one to my attention. There was some news regarding, investigative reports. There was some news about the Norwegian 787 from a few years ago in Rome.
Yeah, you may remember, and I'm sure we talked about on the podcast, one of Norwegian's Rome-based 787-8s, one of the Dash 8s that never had much luck with that particular airline or with those particular engines, lost a couple fan blades and spilled them out over Rome after it departed from runway 10R. And Flight Global has an update on that. Some 32 seconds after taking off, the 787 suffered initial failure just over 1,000 feet on departure. It was actually found that this aircraft, with its Trent 1000 Package B engines, which were not widely known as being that great, had some issues that they say the fan blade failed at 1,210 cycles, still 200 cycles below its life limit imposed by the European Union Aviation Safety Agency, industry. where is it that they also had quite a few other issues within that engine, as 92 blades in the aircraft's right-hand engine also had cracks. 84 similar blades in the left-hand engine were also cracked. I'm not sure if it's clear if they were cracked before or after the failure, but that's a lot of issues on the two engines on that one particular aircraft, which has not flown since it was ferried out of Rome to, where did it go again, Ian?
Went to Prestwick.
There it goes. Yeah, it's been there ever since. It is currently engineless and, well, airlineless now, since Norwegian doesn't operate 787s anymore. So that's a little update from something that feels like ancient history.
Yeah, so the episode that we talked about, this is episode 149. The episode that we talked about, that was episode 64, way back in August of 2019, which feels like 50 years ago.
Yeah. The article goes on to say that 10 similar cases of intermediate pressure turbine blade detachments happened before the Rome incident occurred in 2015. But this issue is well known. There are all sorts of service bulletins and all that to get this remedied. I don't think any of these engines are still flying around with pre-modification blades. I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, by now, I would be surprised to see anything. Shall we dive into this?
Yeah, I don't like it.
Iceland Air released or painted its first aircraft in its new livery last week. And we got to look at it. And Jason and I don't particularly care for it.
They are now a subsidiary of United Airlines, apparently.
I don't mind the billboard titles. And we'll put a link to the aircrafts in the show notes so that anyone following along or anyone at home can follow along. I don't mind the billboard titles. Everything else is so
blah.
I made the comment on Twitter that it's designed by, the accounting and finance department, and somebody said, "Are you calling accountants and finance people boring?" And that wasn't my intent at all. I was speaking purely from a financial perspective, where most of the aircraft is white.
Yeah, and there's a splash of color on the tail, a little strip that is different colors depending on the aircraft. But it's just, I really like the current, the previous Iceland Air livery. I just thought it's really, really classy, really nice. The engines are blue. The engines aren't even blue anymore.
Iceland, to me, has such a distinct, as a country, has such a distinct identity.
Wait, I have to correct myself before we get hate mail.
I was going to let you do that.
Yellow. The belly is blue. The engines are yellow. The engines are no longer yellow. And that is a travesty. Continue.
But Iceland as a country has such a distinctive identity. You'd think that they'd want to have a distinctive identity for the airline. Before anyone talk, they have a splash of color on it. No, that's goofy.
Yeah. And
make the livery, and I will counterpoint myself here. I believe Brett Schneider over at Crank Fire said, "No one cares."
That's also possibly true. As long as the fare is cheap, nobody gives a damn.
But also, this podcast is about aviation, and so I'm going to care.
Also pointed out on Twitter, now that I've corrected myself that the engines are yellow. Yellow seems like a doomed color these days for aircraft liveries. We have Iceland Air removed all the yellow. Lufthansa, just a few years ago, removed all the yellow from its livery. Who else has removed yellow? I don't have the list up in front of me, but it's a weird thing happening where yellow is just banned from airplane liveries.
Well, Spirit bought up all the yellow paint.
Oh, that's right. When they eventually finished repainting their fleet to all yellow in 20 never.
I think Spirit still has 4 liveries?
At least.
Yeah, but so I don't have a list of airlines that have ditched yellow paint. That is a niche list that we should certainly. That sounds like a good blog post.
Yeah, United apparently had yellow. When did United have yellow in their livery?
I mean, I guess goldish.
Goldish, yeah, gold. Yeah, not really yellow. A variation of yellow.
Yeah, maybe. We're going to get hate mail from graphic designers, which is entirely deserved. But yeah, it's there. It looks like an airplane.
Fine.
Yeah, it's fine. That's fine. I mean, I'll fly him. I'll go to Iceland, but I'm going to be, salty about the livery. Okay, two things before we go. One is a document from which this is going to be a fun with acronyms. I'm not going to give any of the meanings of the acronyms. We'll just have to go through it. This was, Jason, you found this from an IATA press release about a UACA decision about Janus.
You heard that right. We had to read this document. The both of us read it about 5 times before we figured out what the hell they were trying to say. But it is in relation to the justified non-use of slots. That's what that acronym translates to, which is basically there's been a lot of hubbub in Europe over ghost flights, basically, that airlines are having to operate flights that are nearly or completely empty throughout Europe to maintain their slots, I guess, at European airports. Yeah. There is the slot allocation is the word I was looking for. So they were basically regulated to the point where they had to operate these flights, whether or not anyone was interested in flying. And it's not a good look for an industry that's trying to be more eco-friendly to operate flights with no one on it, simply because somebody told them they can't not operate the flights. But this document seems to lay out the framework for when an airline can cancel those flights and not run up against the justified non-use of slot issue. It seems like a list of stuff that's probably not going to happen. Things like a quarantine requirement for all passengers, unless they can be avoided by a COVID-19 test or proof of recovery. No one's really doing that in Europe at this point. In the case that only essential travel is allowed, we haven't really seen that in quite a while. Outright travel bans, curfews, lockdowns at either end of the route, but none of this is stuff that's really a lever an airline can pull and say, next summer 2023, we're going to pare back our summer schedule. This seems like more of things that are happening imminently that they can pare back their flights. But it's apparently enough to satisfy IATA, who issued a rare press release where they're happy about a thing that happened.
There was a positive quotation from Willie Walsh, or a positive quotation attributed to Willie Walsh, clearly written by either a PR flack or a lawyer.
Or robot.
Or entirely possible. Either way, interesting development and a positive development as far as a reduction in unnecessary flying, we hope. Who knows if that'll actually happen or if there's just some legal cover here for somebody else. We will close the show with someone at least as nerdy as us, maybe nerdier, and I mean that in the best way possible. Last episode, Jason, you did something I didn't know was possible. Recap what happened for us.
Well, there's a blinky light on the top of a radio tower that I can see out my living room window that recently stopped blinking, or sometimes now blinks, sometimes flickers, sometimes does weird things, and I wanted to tell somebody about it. So I called the FAA and said, hey, this thing's not working right. And they issued a NOTAM very, very quickly. One of our dear listeners actually took the time to look up that NOTAM. So I guess he plugged in the airport code for the downtown Manhattan heliport, KJRB, which then returned the NOTAM, which contained the ASR of said radio tower. Then he took that number and then Googled it and came up with an FCC or FAA violation from April 11th, 2007, in which the District Director, New York Office, Northeast Region Enforcement Bureau found that the City of New York had not properly labeled the tower at its base, and they could not find the plaque basically saying the registration number for the tower. So this tower apparently has had inspection issues in the past, and I just think it's hilarious that someone would put all those pieces together and then send it to us. I'm thankful for that. It's funny, and I will keep you updated on the blinkingness of this obstruction light, and hopefully it is back and blinking, and everyone in downtown Brooklyn can see it again soon.
I absolutely love it. So thank you for looking that up and sending it to us. That was absolutely fantastic. If you are so moved by anything else we've talked about and feel the need to dig into anything further, and you find something that you think is interesting, by all means, email us at podcast@fr24.com. We absolutely love stuff like this. This podcast is a labor of love for both of us. So hearing people, get some enjoyment and then dig even deeper into it is always a great thing. We'll leave it there for episode 149 of AvTalk. 150 is coming up next week. We should probably figure out what's going on.
Yeah, well, we'll probably take one out of the FCC's book and just not think about it until the night before it's due.
Sounds good. I am Ian Petchnick, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.